This is a video about making a deer skull snow globe. It's also a video about thorns and beauty, death and creation, and how they can coexist. This video is also about how not to give up when you're seeing a lot more of the death than the beauty.
Oh god, no. It stinks.
Hey friends, today we'll be turning this deer skull into a snow globe. To start with, you need a skull. You can buy one already cleaned, or you could hunt down a deer yourself, but I took sort of a middle ground approach. This deer was roadkill, and the carrion had already mostly picked it clean. I soaked it first with dish soap and laundry detergent that had digestive enzymes to remove any organic matter, and later with hydrogen peroxide. This sanitizes it without damaging the bones like bleach would. The skull isn't all in one piece and needs to be glued together. I acquired an acrylic globe with a plan to fuse it to an acrylic base to create a waterproof globe. For the base, I'm gluing the acrylic to wood for more structure using a 2-part epoxy glue. I've drilled holes so that I can fill the snow globe with liquid and then seal the holes later. With the base glued on, I'm using the epoxy glue again to seal the holes to prevent water from leaking into the wood. A huge amount of time was spent trying to pose the skull and roses so that the globe can slide over them and everything will fit and fill the sphere in an aesthetically pleasing way. The composition could not be too wide at any point, or else I couldn't fit the globe over it. I wanted the roses to arch upwards to fill the space, so this huge globe wouldn't feel needlessly oversized. It was rather difficult to iterate on because some of my favorite compositions I couldn't fit the globe over. And other times I would ruin my composition in the process of putting the globe over it. I cannot overstate how much time I spent on this part of the process. I have hundreds of hours of footage of me tweaking the rose positioning slightly, trying to get it perfect. It was only after I thought I had finally settled on a composition where I discovered a rather obvious mistake I had made.
Oh, I'm such an idiot. The holes for filling it are outside.
There was no way I would be able to fill the globe this way. I had to drill new holes in the right place. Unfortunately, while trying to drill these new holes...
Oh god, no.
I knocked it on the floor and broke everything apart, so I had to start all over again from gluing the base together to gluing the skull together. I suppose this is kind of a grim piece of art, but it's the winter time in New York, and winter's got me thinking dark thoughts about me and my place in life. I've been watching the birds, the only life this time of year, and the frigid snow as the wind carries it across the hills. Whether I'm successful or not is another matter, but I always aspire for my artwork to have meaning. I was troubled by this piece for a while, trying to figure out what I was trying to say with it, beyond thoughtlessly copying the skull and roses aesthetic that I've surely seen executed better on Pinterest. The seasonal mood disorder that comes with winter didn't help, but therein came my inspiration. One Sunday there was a discussion in the church gathering about why it might be that many artistic or creative types struggle with things like depression, or worse. Various hypotheses were put forth, some more scientific, others more religious or philosophical. One idea that stuck with me, though, was the idea that creative ability and the skill to execute on it is a gift from God. One could then extrapolate that the illnesses and burdens of a creative mind may be Satan's way of trying to prevent the artist from using the gifts God has given them to create beauty into the world. God gives gifts so that beauty can be brought into the world, but Satan cannot abide beauty. Pushing through your self-doubt or criticism or depression, your anxiety or sensory overload, to nevertheless create beauty, could then be seen as a way of fighting against Satan, of triumphing over the dark to bring light into the world. I often think about the deepest parts of the sea or hidden crevices of the rainforest where beauty lies but no human eye has ever seen, or the vast number of planets in space we will never visit. Through this lens, it is not even as important who sees your artwork. Surely God created all of this beauty for a purpose and delights in it. And so too I like to think that God is delighted when we use the gifts that He has given us to bring more beauty into this world, no matter how few eyes see it. I don't normally formally name my artworks, but in my mind this one is called The Curse. Thinking back to the garden when God cursed the earth to produce thistles, that only by hard labor would we bring forth fruit. In that moment death had entered the world. But that doesn't mean all beauty had left with it. The same thistles that prick bloom into beautiful roses. It seems to me that verse doesn't just apply to gardening or tending the earth. It seems that we have to work hard against another kind of thistle when making art too. The curse, then, is not just about the curse of death, but also, if you'll allow me, the curse of creative people being afflicted by Satan in order to prevent them from creating beauty. This world comes with both thorns and beauty, death and creation. Once I had decided on this underlining meaning, I wanted to draw it out more, and so I decided to carve or paint that verse from Genesis on the skull. I had finally found a composition I like, and now it was a matter of making it more aesthetic, painting, gluing, and plastering the base. I've had this skull around for a while, but I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. I had this vague idea of combining it with roses. I had to frame it on a wall, then cut out the wall so that the skull could protrude from it with a sense of depth. As much as I like the idea, it sounds like a bad idea. And although I would have liked to use real roses, that would have made it a very seasonal art piece. But when Boily Hobby Time issued an art challenge for making your own snow globe, I thought it would fit this project well. The snow could even be falling ashes, reinforcing the contrast between beauty and death that was already at play between the skull and roses. Obviously, I would have to use a fake rose, but I felt like this would be less obvious once put in a globe filled with liquid. As I made my final adjustments to the composition, I also tried to secure things in place with UV resin so that it wouldn't move or be jostled around once it was filled with liquid. After I was completely happy with the composition, it was time to weld the acrylic base to the globe. I also applied a layer of UV resin to the seam afterwards for another layer of protection. With the UV resin applied, I put it on a turntable in the sun with a UV light pointing at it so that all the UV resin would cure completely. Once I started filling it, I realized another mistake. It was easy enough to fill with the liquid, distilled water and vegetable glycerin, because I had drilled 2 holes, one for the liquid to come in and one for air to go out. Getting the snow in, however, was another matter, and I realized I should have put this in the globe before I had sealed the base on. I had to slowly plunge in the snow with a brass rod, but while doing so, accidentally dropped it in. This was no small thing. There was no way for me to get it out. It only got worse when I looked closer. At some point, the jaw of the deer skull had fallen open. It was now twice ruined, and there was no way I could do anything to fix it. The acrylic, I believed, was welded into one piece and could not come apart. The only way to take it apart would be to destroy the whole thing and start over again. As I often do when I'm very dismayed by how a project is going, I decided to let it sit for a while I thought of possible ways to salvage the situation. Imagine my further dismay when I came back later and the skull had entirely fallen off the base, and not only that, mold was growing everywhere. I wasn't entirely sure the expensive fake rose I had bought could even be salvaged, whether the skull could be reassembled, or whether I wanted to go through the expense of replacing the acrylic globe if I broke it while taking everything apart. Even if I'd tried again, I couldn't think of a way to stop the same problems from happening the second time, no matter how much I brainstormed. I've rarely given up on projects, but you can't always win. Sometimes, like with a relationship, no matter how bad you want something, there's no way to make it work. You have to know when to give up and move on. But when the whole meaning behind this artwork is that we are called to fight against Satan's attempts to thwart us from using the gifts God has given us to create beauty, how could I give up on this project? So, returning to it, I found the acrylic wasn't as firmly welded together as I thought, and the whole thing popped apart rather easily. This wasn't exactly reassuring. If I was going to try to do this again, I would have to find a way to make everything much stronger. If the skull fell apart and the acrylic separated so easily, imagine if I had completed filling it and tried to shake the thing like you do with snow globes to stir up the snow. But determined to salvage this project somehow, I decided I would simply split this into 2 separate projects. I would keep my original deer skull and rose design, just not in a snow globe. Then later, I will make something else into a snow globe with the acrylic globe. There is still, of course, the issue of how to get rid of the mold on the flower and the deer skull.
Oh, it stinks. There's mold everywhere.
I tried probably a dozen different ways of doing this, and the results still weren't perfect. But I decided it was good enough to move on. Someone once made the metaphor that just as when Jesus broke bread, it multiplied to feed the 5,000, that so likewise it is in the moments that we feel we are being broken. It is in that place His Spirit is multiplying within us. In this way, it feels somewhat poetic that the breaking of my project led to 2 whole separate projects instead. I'm speeding through this project because a lot of it is repeating steps I did before, like gluing the skull together, only I'm creating a new base with moss on it. The moss is something I couldn't have done with the snow globe idea, but it puts a little more focus on the life instead of the death. The irony of this project is in my thinking I had already learned the lesson of the glory in fighting against the darkness, depression, and all the ways in which Satan tries to keep us from bringing beauty into this world. But in the very making of this project to preach that message, I was humbled to be taught it again and again. It seems us humans often don't learn a lesson completely the first time around. It is only internalized by repetition. And I'm sure that God will continue to teach me this lesson again and again in projects going forwards also. But I hope that through this video, I've been able to encourage you, too, to use the gifts God has given you to bring beauty into this world, whatever your particular burdens that are holding you back.